The morning sun rose slowly over Miller's Ridge, stretching golden light across fields that had seen generations of hard work. Dew clung to the grass, sparkling like tiny diamonds, and a cool breeze carried the scent of soil and rust. At the far end of a dirt road stood Eli Carter's barn. From a distance, it looked like it had given up years ago. The red paint had peeled into uneven patches, the wooden planks warped and cracked from countless seasons of heat and rain. The roof sagged just enough to make strangers uneasy. And scattered around it, half hidden in weeds and dust, lay what most people called junk. But Eli didn't see it that way. He stood at the barn entrance, holding a chipped enamel mug filled with black coffee. His eyes scanned the yard the way a librarian scans shelves, not for clutter, but for order. There was an old tractor frame leaning against the fence. To anyone else, it was scrap metal. To Eli, it was a rare model with a still usable transmission. Near the barn door sat 3 wooden crates filled with bolts, sorted not by size alone but by thread type, something he had learned the hard way after years of trial and error. Inside the barn, it was dim but alive. Every shelf told a story. Every tool had a place. Not a perfect place, but a familiar one. Eli stepped in, setting his mug down on a workbench worn smooth from decades of use. Without thinking, he picked up a wrench and turned toward a half-disassembled engine. This was his ritual. Every morning, before the world woke up, before anyone came asking for help, Eli worked. Sometimes he fixed things. Sometimes he just cleaned and organized. Sometimes he failed repeatedly at the same problem. But he always showed up. That was his habit. He loosened a stubborn bolt, paused, adjusted his grip, and tried again. The small click of success echoed in the quiet barn. Eli allowed himself a faint smile. It wasn't a big victory, but it was enough. It always was. The rumble of an engine broke the silence. Eli looked up as a white truck approached, tires crunching against gravel. He frowned slightly. Visitors this early were rare, and usually not good news. The truck stopped, and 2 men stepped out. Their clothes were too clean for farm work, their posture too stiff for friendly conversation. One carried a clipboard, the other a folder. Eli wiped his hands on a rag and walked out to meet them. "Morning," he said calmly. "Mr. Carter?" the man with the clipboard asked. "That's me." The man glanced around, his eyes lingering on the scattered machinery and stacked parts. "We've received multiple complaints about this property," he said. "Concerns about safety, zoning violations, and general appearance." Eli didn't respond right away. He followed the man's gaze, seeing the same yard, but through a different lens. To them, it was disorder. To him, it was years of effort. "This isn't a junkyard," Eli said quietly. "It's a workshop." The second man opened the folder and pulled out a paper. "Regardless of what you call it," he said, "you are in violation of local ordinances. You have 30 days to clear the property. Remove all non-compliant materials." He handed Eli the notice. The paper felt heavier than it should have. 30 days, Eli repeated. "That's correct." Eli looked back at his barn. For a moment, the weight of their words pressed down on him. 30 days to erase years of work. 30 days to dismantle the life he had built piece by piece. After that, the man continued, "Further action will be taken." Eli nodded slowly. "I understand." The men didn't linger. They returned to their truck, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind nothing but dust, and a deadline. The silence that followed felt different. Eli stood there for a long moment, the notice still in his hand. The barn creaked softly in the breeze, as if it, too, felt the tension. He walked back inside, setting the paper down on the workbench. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do next. He sat on the old stool in the corner, staring at the piles of parts around him. The same parts he had collected, repaired, and saved, day after day, year after year. Was it all meaningless? The question crept in quietly, but it hit hard. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just junk. Maybe all those mornings, all those hours, had been wasted. Eli leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His hands, rough and scarred, told a different story, one of persistence, of learning, of refusing to quit. His eyes drifted to a small engine on the shelf. He remembered that one. It had taken him weeks to fix. Every time he thought he had solved it, something else went wrong. Anyone else would have thrown it away. But not Eli. Every morning, he had come back to it. Same time, same place, same effort, not because he was sure he'd succeed, but because it was what he did. His habit. Eventually, it worked, and that feeling, the quiet satisfaction of solving something through patience, had stayed with him. Eli stood up slowly. He walked over to the shelves, running his fingers across the metal surfaces. Each piece held a lesson. Each failure had taught him something new. This wasn't junk. This was experience. This was preparation. He took a deep breath. No, he said firmly. I'm not throwing this away. The next morning, Eli woke up before sunrise. For a brief second, he considered staying in bed. The notice weighed on his mind, whispering doubts. What's the point? But habit didn't argue. It didn't debate. It simply nudged him forward. Eli got up. He put on his worn boots, grabbed his coffee, and walked to the barn. Same steps, same routine. Inside, he didn't rush. He didn't panic. He started small. He picked up a box of bolts and began sorting them more carefully. He labeled containers. He cleared pathways. He cleaned tools that hadn't been touched in years. One task at a time. One habit at a time. Hours passed. The barn didn't transform overnight, but something shifted. It felt intentional, controlled, alive. By midday, Eli stepped back and looked around. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty, but it made sense to him, and that was enough. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Eli returned to his workbench. The notice still lay there, unchanged. 30 days. He picked it up, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer. Then he grabbed his wrench again. The familiar weight settled into his hand. The world outside might see a deadline, but inside the barn, nothing had changed. Eli turned back to the engine and got to work. Because in the end, it wasn't the notice that defined him. It was what he did next. The 15th day arrived quietly, but the world beyond Miller's Ridge was anything but calm. At first, it was just a rumor, something mentioned in passing at the feed store, a complaint overheard at the edge of a conversation. Parts are delayed, orders aren't coming in. Something's wrong with the supply chain. Most people didn't think much of it. Delays happened. Trucks broke down. Warehouses ran late. It was inconvenient, but manageable. Until it wasn't. Within days, the rumors hardened into reality. Farmers who had ordered essential tractor parts weeks ago were receiving the same response: indefinite delay. Mechanics couldn't source basic components. Even the larger suppliers had empty shelves where inventory once stood. The timing couldn't have been worse. Harvest season was approaching fast. Machines that had been pushed hard all year were beginning to fail. Belts snapping, engines stalling, gears grinding down from wear and tear. Normally, it was a simple fix. Order a replacement, wait a day or two, get back to work. But now, there were no replacements. And panic began to spread. Eli Carter, meanwhile, followed his routine. The notice still sat folded in his drawer, but it no longer felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Instead, it had become something else, a quiet reminder that time mattered. Every morning, he stepped into the barn and continued his steady work. Sort, clean, repair, test, repeat. By now, the barn had changed in ways only a careful eye would notice. The scattered chaos had turned into a kind of structured order. Wooden crates were labeled in thick black marker. Shelves were grouped by function. Fuel systems on one side, transmission parts on another. Paths had been cleared through the narrow spaces, allowing Eli to move quickly without hesitation. It wasn't just organization, it was memory made visible. Every item had a place, and every place had a reason. The first knock came just after sunrise. Eli was tightening a bolt on an old engine when he heard it, soft, uncertain. He stepped outside to find Tom Willis, a farmer from down the road, standing by the gate. Tom shifted awkwardly, hat in hand. "Morning, Eli," he said. "Morning," Eli replied. "What brings you here?" Tom hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the barn, the same barn he had once joked about with others. I heard you might have some spare parts." Eli leaned against the doorframe. "Depends on what you need." "Carburetor," Tom said. "Old model. Can't find one anywhere. My tractor's dead in the field. Eli nodded slowly. Come on. Inside the barn, Tom looked around with new eyes. What had once seemed like random piles now appeared, intentional, organized, even precise. Eli didn't waste time. He moved through the aisles with quiet confidence, his steps unhurried but certain. He didn't search. He knew. Third shelf. Back corner. Left side. He reached into a crate and pulled out a carburetor. Tom blinked. You just knew where that was. Eli shrugged. Put it there myself. He set it on the workbench, inspecting it carefully. Needs a little cleaning, Eli said. But it'll work. Tom let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. You just saved my harvest, he said. Eli gave a small nod. Let's make sure it runs first. Word spread faster than anyone expected. By the next day, another farmer showed up. Then another. Then two more. Each one came with the same problem, and the same desperation. No parts. Machines down. Don't know what else to do. And each time, Eli did what he had always done. He followed his process. He didn't rush. He didn't guess. He listened, assessed, and then moved through the barn with the quiet certainty of someone who had built his knowledge one day at a time. Years of habit guided every action. Where others saw randomness, he saw a map. Where others felt panic, he relied on routine. By the 20th day, Eli's barn was no longer quiet. The once empty yard now held trucks, tractors, and anxious farmers waiting their turn. The air buzzed with conversation, concern, and, slowly, hope. Inside, Eli worked steadily. He repaired fuel pumps, rebuilt engines, and assembled working systems from parts that had been discarded years ago. Nothing went to waste. A gear from one machine paired with a shaft from another. A belt salvaged from an old unit brought a newer one back to life. It wasn't luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity. One afternoon, as Eli wiped his hands on his rag, he noticed a familiar white truck pulling into the driveway. The same one. The officials stepped out, but this time, their expressions were different. Gone was the cold detachment. In its place was something closer to curiosity, even respect. They approached slowly, taking in the scene. Farmers stood in small groups, talking. Engines roared to life one after another. The barn, once dismissed as a hazard, now pulsed with purpose. What's going on here? One of the men asked. Eli didn't stop working. People need parts. The man glanced around. And you have them. Eli finally looked up. I kept them. The officials stepped inside the barn. For a moment, neither spoke. They watched as Eli moved from one task to another, never hesitating, never second-guessing. Every motion was efficient, practiced. How are you keeping track of all this? One of them asked. Eli tightened a bolt, then set down his wrench. Same way I always have, he said. A little bit every day. The men exchanged glances. What they had once labeled as disorder now revealed itself as something far more valuable. A system built not in a day, but over years of consistent effort. By the 25th day, the shortage had reached its peak. Supply chains were still frozen. Larger operations struggled, but in Miller's Ridge, something unexpected had happened. The community adapted, and at the center of it all, was Eli's barn. Machines that should have been useless were running again. Fields that should have been lost were being harvested. People who had once doubted Eli now depended on him. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he had been consistent. On the 30th day, the white truck returned one last time. Eli was at the workbench, as usual. The officials stepped out and approached him, but this time, there was no clipboard. No folder. Just a quiet understanding. We've reviewed your case, one of them said. Eli raised an eyebrow, and the man took a breath. Given the current situation, your barn is no longer considered a violation. He paused. It's considered essential. Eli stared at him for a moment, then let out a soft chuckle. Funny how that works. That evening, the barn was quiet again. The last tractor had been fixed. The last farmer had gone home. Eli stood at the doorway, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The same fields, the same sky, the same barn, but something had changed. Not the barn itself, not the tools, not even the work. What had changed was how people saw it. Eli took a deep breath and stepped inside. Tomorrow, he would wake up early. He would pick up his wrench. And he would do it all again. Because in the end, it wasn't the shortage that saved the town. It was the habit that had prepared him for it. The shortage didn't end all at once. It loosened slowly, like a tight bolt finally giving way after steady pressure. A shipment here, a delayed order there. By the time the first trucks began arriving again with fresh parts, Miller's Ridge had already learned how to survive without them. And at the center of that lesson stood Eli Carter's barn. The morning after the officials declared his place essential, Eli woke up at the same time he always did. No celebration, no change in routine. The sun hadn't risen yet when he stepped outside, boots crunching against the gravel. The air felt different, not quieter, not louder, just settled. For the first time in weeks, no one was waiting at the gate. Eli paused for a moment, glancing at the empty driveway. Then he nodded to himself and walked into the barn. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it. Tools in place, shelves organized, workbench clean except for a single engine part waiting to be fitted. He picked up his wrench. Same habit, same motion. Because that was the thing about habits, they didn't depend on emergencies. They didn't show up only when needed. They were there before, and they stayed after. Later that day, Tom Willis returned, but this time, he wasn't in a rush. His tractor was running smoothly now, and the urgency that once filled his voice had been replaced with something else, respect. "Morning, Eli," Tom said, stepping into the barn. "Morning," Eli replied without looking up. "Everything holding up, better than ever," Tom said with a grin. He looked around, taking in the shelves, the labeled crates, the quiet order of it all. "You know, we all got it wrong," Tom added after a pause. Eli tightened a bolt and set the wrench down. "About what?" Tom chuckled softly. "This place. We called it junk." Eli wiped his hands on his rag. "You weren't the only ones." Tom shook his head. "No, but we were loud about it." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tom stepped closer to one of the shelves, running his fingers lightly over a row of neatly arranged parts. "How long did it take you to build all this?" he asked. Eli leaned against the workbench, thinking. "Didn't build it all at once," he said. "Just kept showing up, one day at a time." Tom nodded slowly, as if the answer carried more weight than it first seemed. Over the next few weeks, life in Miller's Ridge began to return to normal. New parts became available again. Suppliers restocked. Mechanics resumed their usual routines. But something had changed. People didn't rush to replace things as quickly anymore. They repaired. They reused. They paid attention. And many of them, whether they admitted it or not, had picked up a bit of Eli's way of doing things. One afternoon, a young man named Caleb showed up at the barn. Eli recognized him, the kind of kid who usually preferred shortcuts over effort. "Mr. Carter," Caleb said, a little unsure of himself. "I was wondering, could you teach me some of this?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "Some of what?" Caleb gestured around the barn. "Fixing things. Keeping track of parts. All of it." Eli studied him for a moment. "Why?" he asked. Caleb hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because when everything went wrong, you were ready. And I wasn't." Eli nodded slowly. That, he understood. He walked over to the workbench and picked up a small, worn-out component. "Start with this," he said, handing it to Caleb. Caleb turned it over in his hands. "What is it?" Eli smiled faintly. "Something broken," he said. "Your job is to figure out why." Caleb looked uncertain. That's it. Days turned into weeks. Caleb kept coming back. At first, he struggled. He made mistakes. He got frustrated. But Eli didn't rush him. "Come back tomorrow," he'd say. And Caleb did. Slowly, something began to change. Not just in his skill, but in his mindset. He started showing up earlier. He paid closer attention. He stopped looking for quick fixes and started building understanding. Without realizing it, he was forming the same habit that had shaped Eli's life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Caleb sat on the old stool, examining a part he had finally managed to repair. "It works," he said, almost surprised. Eli nodded. "Took you long enough." Caleb laughed. "Yeah, but I didn't quit this time." Eli leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "That's the difference," he said. Most people stop when it gets hard. Habit keeps you going. Caleb looked around the barn. It's not really about the parts, is it? He said. Eli shook his head. Never was. As the seasons shifted and the fields turned from green to gold, Eli's barn remained what it had always been. Not a junkyard, not just a workshop, but a place built on consistency, on patience, on the quiet power of doing the same small things, day after day, even when no one was watching. One morning, Eli stood at the barn door once again, coffee in hand. The fields stretched out before him, alive with movement. Tractors hummed in the distance. Farmers worked with steady confidence. And in those machines, in their reliability, their resilience, was a reflection of something deeper. Something built long before the shortage. Something that would last long after. Eli took a sip of his coffee and smiled faintly. Because he knew something most people were just beginning to understand. Big moments don't create strength. They reveal it. And strength is built in the small, repeated actions no one notices. Habits are the foundation of resilience. What you do consistently, especially when it seems unimportant, prepares you for moments that define everything. When challenges come, it's not talent or luck that saves you, but the discipline you built long before you needed it.